All right. Hello. Good evening, Mr. Ippolito students. This is Mr. Ippolito, along with Mr. Hahn here on the live chat, and welcome to our February 2020 Early Republic Unit Exam Review. Very excited to have you here. I'll give a quick shout out really quickly just to the students that I can see on the chat. So Leah, Alexa, welcome. Emily, got you. Shivani, John Sarte, Mr. Hahn, and Sebastian, hello, and Chloe. We've got Brendan, Lainey, Rachel. I'll give you a shout out as well. Hello, hello, hello to all of you. And to everybody else so far, we've got 30 people here. Sophia's there. Hello, Sophia. And Luca, Hasvita, Michelle, you're there. Caitlin, Bailey, nice. Brandon Stoker, hello. Welcome. I'll try to, there's Brendan Groller as well. Hello. So all right, try to give a few more shout outs in just a little bit. So welcome. We want to use our time wisely. We have about an hour this evening. And welcome once again to the Early Republic Unit Exam Review. Janessa, Brandon Abrahano, and Beast Productions, whoever you are. Hola to you as well. All right. So we're going to do things just slightly differently. And I want to explain exactly what's going on here. So what I decided to do, because if you have been following previous chats, the chat gets so insane that it's sometimes really difficult to kind of follow along with what people want. So what I did was I did a vote, and you can see the link, and I'm going to share this one more time. I'm going to put it in the chat one more time so that you can see this. If you would like to vote for the topics that you would like to see discussed here, that is the link that I just put in the chat. You can click on that link and you can vote. And I think that's going to make life a little bit easier for us, because if you've been on these chats before, you know that there's just so much stuff and so many people requesting things. So we're going to go ahead and kind of give that upvote kind of system and go that way. And then with whatever time we have left, we'll keep rolling. I will very quickly, since Leah, you included a comment, will there be anything about Andrew Jackson on the test? The stuff that's on Andrew Jackson, because we just started learning about Jackson, Leah, I will tell you and tell everybody else that really the only thing that we need to know is number 11. And I'll get to number 11 if that's one of our most popular requested questions. But other than that, really nothing else on Andrew Jackson, because we really haven't studied him yet. So just what we got in chapter 6, section 3. And then, okay. And so now, and then Shivani, you asked a clarifying question on number 1. We need to know the meaning and the key points of Obama's farewell address. No. So it's just George Washington's. The reason why I taught you Obama's farewell address was just to compare the most recent farewell address with the very first farewell address, which was President Washington. So you just need to know the George Washington side of that. Okay. I think we are now ready. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump right in. And I'm going to take a look at our responses and see what we have. So far, most popular on the front page. We're going to start on the front page first. George Washington's farewell address and the Supreme Court cases. So the most popular was George Washington's farewell address. And it asks, what were the main points of George Washington's farewell address? How well have we followed his advice and know the meaning of all of those passages, right? So what you want to do, there are 2 different assignments that include Washington's farewell address. By the way, if you want to make sure that you have all of the assignments that you're studying from, the best way to do that is to make sure you just take a look at the table of contents on MrIppolito.com. On the table of contents, which is at the bottom of every agenda, there are a total of 17 different items. The 2 items that we're looking at here are item number 2, Soapstone 2 farewell addresses, and then also Washington Goes Home. So if I'm taking a look at 2 farewell addresses, I'm taking a look at source number 2. This was Washington's farewell address. I don't have a paper copy to show you, but at the top of it, it says President George Washington's farewell address, 1796. We just don't have the time for me to read through all of that. But if you recall our discussion and you remember what George Washington talked about, there were some things in there that we spent a good amount of time focusing on. We talked about how President George Washington discussed education. He talked about unity of government, us all sticking together. We need to be patriotic. We need to be one nation. So those are just some of the highlights from that particular speech. You should go over the speech and also go over your notes as well. This is all going to be in the written portion, right? So a lot of what you're going to need to know for the farewell address is going to be in the written portion. And what Mr. Hahn and I are doing for the written portion is we are providing excerpts, right? Little passages from the farewell address, and you're going to need to know how to interpret those. Now, there's nothing new. We're not sharing anything new with you. It's just the portions that we've already read and that we've already discussed and that we've already gone over. I'm now going to go back to MrIppolito.com, and I'm just going to go into the Washington Goes Home handout. At the top, it just says George Washington goes home. And there are 4 quotes, right? So the 4 quotes that are at the bottom of the page. It says, know what each of these quotes mean from Washington's farewell address. So quote A, promote then as an object of primary importance institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. Basically, President George Washington there is saying, hey, you need to promote education, right? So he's saying that education, and I'm going to further extend that and say it's public education that he's promoting. He's saying that it helps the public opinion to be enlightened. In other words, when we have educated people, then we have educated public opinion, and we have an educated government. So you need to go through each one of those, and you need to understand what each one, quote A, quote B, quote C, and quote D. So that's what, if you have not looked at those, you should look at those and figure out what each one of those means. So that's, without me actually like interpreting these all for you, I think that's where you should start on that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead. If we want to circle back to this at the end, we can, but I know there's a lot more that people want to talk about. So I'm going to go back, and it looks like the next thing, Marbury versus Madison and McCulloch versus Maryland. We literally just talked about this yesterday and today in class, right? So those are the 2 Supreme Court cases. And I'll just tell you really quickly, Marbury versus Madison, judicial review, right? That's the power that the Supreme Court has to declare laws or executive actions unconstitutional. So when, for example, when the Supreme Court in 1954 struck down segregation, specifically segregation in schools, it was declaring all of those state laws unconstitutional. The very first example in Marbury versus Madison, it was a law. It was the Judiciary Act of 1789 that it declared a portion of that unconstitutional. So before that case, the Supreme Court really didn't know exactly what its full role was in terms of the system of checks and balances. After the Marbury versus Madison case, the Supreme Court finally had that power. It had that gravitas. It had that like purpose. We talked in class, for a few students kind of asked this question, and I responded, or Mr. Hahn responded this way. The presidency, since the time of the Constitution, the presidency had this much power, Congress had this much power, but the Supreme Court was kind of down here. So after Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court's status and power as a co-equal branch of government really kind of rose to the same level as Congress and the presidency after Marbury versus Madison. So if you remember just 2 words from Marbury versus Madison, it's judicial review, the power of the Supreme Court to declare laws and executive actions unconstitutional. Let's talk really quickly now about McCulloch versus Maryland. If you recall from what we just learned about yesterday or today, that was a Supreme Court case in 1819 that basically said that Maryland did not have the power to tax the national bank in the state of Maryland. So states have a lot of power and authority over what happens within their borders. They also have the power to tax. So states can tax any number of things within their borders, but one thing they cannot tax is the national government or an institution created by the national government. So it basically, McCulloch versus Maryland reinforced the supremacy clause of the Constitution. In other words, the federal government, the national government, is always going to be supreme to the state governments. Now, we did offer one kind of little exception or kind of hiccup to that, and that's when the federal government just doesn't have the resources to enforce its law as opposed to the state law. So we talked about the legalization of marijuana in California, for example. It is against federal law to sell or to purchase or distribute marijuana. It's classified as a Schedule I narcotic. However, the federal government just doesn't have the resources to be prosecuting marijuana crimes, especially on just such a small scale. And so usually the states that have legalized marijuana, either for adults over the age of 21 for recreational use or medical marijuana for people 18 or over, the federal government basically just kind of looks the other way. with regard to those kind of laws. So sometimes they just sort of look the other way, but most of the time, though, the federal government is going to declare its supremacy, which it got from the McCulloch versus Maryland case. The federal government is always going to be, federal laws will always be supreme to state laws. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the chat here and just kind of make sure everybody's doing okay. I will let you know, Abby, really quickly, since you asked the dates. I happen to rattle off 1803 Marbury versus Madison, 1809 McCulloch versus Maryland. It's not necessarily that you need to know these specific dates. You should know, though, that Marbury versus Madison came before McCulloch versus Maryland, right? So I think that's helpful. For those of you just joining us, by the way, because I see Abby asking another question as well. The best, easiest way for you to do this, if you would like to cast your vote for which topic should we discuss the most, I have a little survey that I put. If you scroll up a little bit, you click on that link and you can vote for the topics that you want to talk about. Right now we're on the front page, and I'm going to be on the front page for another like 9 minutes, and then we'll go to the back page, and then we'll finish with vocab, and then any other questions that you may have. Okay, so I'm going to go back now to the front page. And another thing that was frequently asked, in addition to George Washington's farewell address and Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, was France, Britain, and U.S. foreign policy. That is question number 2. So it says, no one understand the major events that happened during the terms of each of the... Oh, no, I'm sorry. What was going on with France? What was going on with France and Britain? France and Britain were at war for like 400 years, off and on. And during much of the presidencies of George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, those countries were at least in rivalry or conflict, if not in all-out war. For the last half of those years, there was actually the Napoleonic Wars, where France was fighting, much of Europe. So that's the first thing. Like France and Britain were either in a rivalry or a conflict or direct all-out like war with each other. The next question says, how were we treated and what did we do about it? So we discussed this in a lot of classes yesterday and today. We kind of got caught in the crossfire because on the one hand, France and Britain were our greatest trade partners, right? So we wanted to trade with them. We wanted to interact with them. The Federalists kind of liked Britain more, and the Democratic Republicans liked France more. So we wanted to have friendly relationships with both of these countries, and we wanted to trade with both of these countries and interact with them. But that's tough when you're trying to trade with like the enemy of your other friend. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like in junior high school when you had two friends who are fighting against each other, and like you kind of want to be friends with both, but it's really tough to do that when they're fighting with each other. So we were being disrespected by France. They were attacking our ships because we were trading with Britain. They didn't like that. That was during John Adams' administration. It's something called the quasi-war or the undeclared war with France, where they were attacking us and we were trying to stand up for ourselves. So that was happening during John Adams' presidency. Throughout this time, we were being impressed. Our sailors were being impressed by the British Navy, right? Because they were looking for what they thought were British sailors who could speak English and who knew how to operate a ship. They were short on these British naval ships. And so they were basically kidnapping our sailors and forcing them to work for the British Navy. So France was attacking us. The British Navy was impressing us. The British, later on, the British were attacking American ships. And so we were feeling disrespected. I think disrespected by both nations. Ultimately, of course, it came to the biggest the biggest climax in the War of 1812, where when the question asks, what did we do about it? Ultimately, we went to war against Great Britain because not only were we feeling disrespected on the Atlantic Ocean, but we were also feeling disrespected on the frontier, right? Because Britain, if you remember, was arming the Native Americans against us. And so we were being disrespected on the ocean. We were being attacked on the frontier. We were just feeling pushed around and we didn't like it and we weren't going to take it anymore. So it resulted in the War of 1812. And then the final question is, how did these experiences strengthen us as a nation? So I would say we were strengthened mostly by the fact that first of all, we knew that we could stand up to major world powers, particularly at the conclusion of the War of 1812, where it was really a draw, right? You've heard the word or the Latin term, status quo ante bellum, which means by the time the war was over, everything just kind of went back to the way it was before the war. No land changed hands, no money changed hands. We're all like, all right, well, I guess we'll just go back to the way, we'll just do a reset. But we really did feel a great sense of national pride after the War of 1812, after the Battle of New Orleans. We felt like we could stand on our own 2 feet. We also felt like, American industry and manufacturing, because we couldn't trade with either Britain or France or really anybody during a time of war. We had to rely on ourselves and rely on, just kind of our own manufacturing, our own kind of, we had to be much more self-reliant during that time. So that was also a great source of pride, as well as the Star Spangled Banner, the Battle of Fort McHenry. There were lots of examples of heroism, American heroism in the War of 1812 as well. Okay, I think that's going to be it for number 2. I'm going to talk about the other 2 questions that are coming up strong: Tecumseh and the Prophet, and the first 7 presidents handout. So I'm gonna hit Tecumseh and the Prophet first, and I will say this: the question asks, who were they? So if you remember from the video we watched and the discussion we had afterwards, Tecumseh was a Shawnee leader. His younger brother, whose name was Laliwithika, his nickname was the Prophet, nicknamed the Prophet because some people believed that he could look into the future and he had some sort of, like prophetic. He could kind of like, look into what was going to happen, what was to come. So Tecumseh and the Prophet, they were both Native Americans from the Shawnee tribe in the Ohio River Valley. They, like many of the Shawnee and many of the other Native American tribes of the Ohio River Valley, were feeling pushed around, were feeling unfairly treated by the Americans as they pushed further and further into the American frontier. How do they all fit in with the War of 1812 and the land disputes? So really, this kind of opens up the larger question of, we talk about winners and losers. This was a discussion that we had about the War of 1812. Did Britain win? Did the United States win? No, they kind of fought to a draw. But the consensus that historians come to is that the Native Americans were kind of the biggest losers of the War of 1812, because they, Britain, at the end of the day, they can go home and they're going to be fine back in Britain, or to Canada, right? But the Native Americans, at the end of the day, they're stuck. They were fighting against the Americans, and they would ultimately, they were kind of caught in the crossfire between Britain and the United States, and ultimately they're going to end up paying the price. They're going to end up losing land. They're going to end up kind of on the losing side of this. And so that was kind of the the end result of that. Tecumseh, ultimately, he died at the Battle of the Thames during the War of 1812, early on in like 1813, I think, was when the Battle of the Thames was in what is today Canada, right? So that was part of the United States effort, was to try to take over a portion of Canada. Obviously didn't work, but so anyway, that's kind of and honestly, I don't know what happened to his brother. We asked that question, and I'm sure it's something that's easily Googleable. I'm not sure what happened to Laliwithika, the prophet, but I do know that Tecumseh died during the War of 1812 at the Battle of the Thames. Okay, that would be, I think, the biggest thing that that you would need to know. Okay, so with regard to Tecumseh and the prophet, the next question that you asked was, and we're about ready to switch over, it's know and understand the major events of the first 7 presidents. So clearly, we don't have time to go over all of the events of all the 7 presidents, but that's something. Those were notes that, as I reminded you over the weeks, like, you should have been filling those in, right? So the accomplishments of George Washington, what happened during his term, and, kind of what some of the major events were. I'll go over them briefly, right? So George Washington set a lot of those precedents. That's one of your vocabulary terms, I believe, is the word precedent. George Washington wanted to maintain neutrality with Britain and France. He didn't want to get involved. George Washington gave his farewell address, very famous farewell address. He created the first cabinet. So George Washington was kind of all about those firsts. And oh my goodness, the dog is going crazy right now. And I'm not sure what's going on in the kitchen, but it's a little bit of a distraction. Anyway, so that was George Washington's presidency. John Adams' presidency. We've got the quasi war with France. Dog is still going crazy over there. John Adams was considered the father of the American Navy, right? So John Adams didn't want to. He knew, just like when we watched the 30-minute portion of Master and Commander, that film that we watched. John Adams knew very well that the oceans at this time were battlefields, and if you had a strong presence on the ocean, then you were stronger as a country, right? So that's where if you're going to invest military dollars in the late 1700s, early 1800s, you invested those military dollars in your navy on the ocean, because that's where that's really what made for strong military nations at that time was the navy. Thomas Jefferson, some major accomplishments. Again, I'm just trying to go very quickly because we're gonna flip over to the backside really soon. Major accomplishments. The biggest Louisiana Purchase, I think, would be one of those biggest accomplishments of Thomas Jefferson. Contributed to the Library of Congress, if you recall. But this was after his presidency. But much of Washington, D.C. was burned. You know what? This was after his presidency. I'm not even going to bring it up. But I will mention that he either donated or sold most of his library to rebuild the Library of Congress after the British burned it down in the War of 1812. Louisiana Purchase, I would say another big accomplishment of Jefferson's presidency, his inaugural speech in 1801, where, again, if you recall, this is the first time in history where it's a bloodless revolution. We talked about the Revolution of 1800, where this election transfers power from the Federalist Party over to the Democratic Republican Party. And was there bloodshed? Was there a coup, a revolution? No, it was a silent revolution. It was a peaceful revolution because John Adams was there at the inauguration. John Adams wished Thomas Jefferson well. Thomas Jefferson took over power, and then he gave his very conciliatory, very peace-loving speech, uniting speech. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. We're all Americans, was really what he was trying to say, right? So it's not about political parties. It's about us coming together as a nation. So I would point to that as another accomplishment of Thomas Jefferson. All right. Oh, well, and then perhaps an embarrassment of Thomas Jefferson, the Embargo Act, right? Because the Embargo Act was Jefferson's attempt to try to solve the problem of being harassed by both Britain and France. And so he's just like, you know what, we're not gonna trade with anybody at all. And of course, it went over horribly, because if we were to stop our trade with every nation today, that would be a serious disruption in the American economy. Like we would go nuts. Like it would be really, really bad for us. Same thing back then. Like our economy then, as now, relies very heavily on foreign trade. We need to trade with other nations. That's just the thing that you do. There are things that you don't have that you need to buy from other nations. There are things that other nations don't have that we can make money on by selling to them. So international trade has always been a part of the United States economic tradition, and to interrupt that, to stop that completely, happened during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Probably one of his biggest embarrassments of his presidency was the Embargo Act. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to check the chat, by the way, because oh my goodness, lots of chat going on here. So really, what I'm going to do, and Mr. Hahn, hey, by the way, thank you to everybody who's kind of helping each other out. I noticed that somebody was asking about the link. This is your link, by the way, for those of you just joining us. Hello, welcome. It's 8:23 right now. We're about a third of the way through our review. I'm going to go ahead and copy this link. For those of you just joining us, I tried to make life easier for myself by creating a survey that would help me determine what topics you are interested in the most. So I've been going based on that survey rather than like trying to scroll through all these comments. I'm done with the front page for right now. I'm going to switch over to the back page and look at those back page survey results. And it looks like I've got 3 topics that are of the greatest importance to you. The biggest one is number 8, Latin American revolutions and the Monroe Doctrine. So I'm going to start off with that first. And that is question number 8. Oh, and of course that's on my front page. Oh, that's so funny. It's on I printed it out anyway. That's not your concern. That's mine. How did the events in Latin America affect the U.S. in the late 1700s and early 1800s? And how did events in the United States affect Latin America? I'm actually going to flip it and start with how did the United States affect Latin America? The biggest way is the fact that our American Revolution, the fact that for the first time in the history of the world, a democracy was created as a result of a revolution against a monarchy, right? There was Greek democracy, but Greek democracy really more evolved rather than being a, like an overthrow, right, of a monarchy. Here in the United States, we overthrew a king. We had a revolution and we created our own democracy, or technically a republic, as a result of that revolution. So we were really proud of it. And we, as a result, the Declaration of Independence and then later the Constitution that we created became an inspiration for other people all over the world who were seeking freedom from their oppressors, from their oppressive European nations, right? So we broke away from Britain, and there were several different, ultimately would become republics, nations in Central and South America and also Mexico that looked to us as an inspiration, looked to the French Revolution as inspiration, looked to Haiti as inspiration. If you recall, this is all the discussion we had in our discussion on Latin American revolutions. That's also in your notes. So really, that was how the United States impacted Latin America. Vice versa. How did Latin America impact us? Well, I think really the biggest way was because we inspired those revolutions. There were a lot of new independent nations that were springing up in the Caribbean and in South America, also Mexico during this time. So by the 1820s, we're like, late 1820, I'll say early 1820s. I think that's safe because that's still when James Monroe was president. James Monroe was president until 1825. We feel like the United States feels like we have a responsibility kind of to act as the big brother of the rest of the Americas, the rest of the Western Hemisphere, because we were the first to rebel, to have a revolution. And then all of these other revolutions are kind of sparking throughout the Americas. And so finally, President James Monroe decided in 1823 to say to Europe in his Monroe Doctrine, hey, you know what? You need to stay away. You've had your time. You've had your chance to colonize the New World. But the natural evolution of things is that these countries are rebelling against you and they are declaring themselves independent nations, and you need to back off. Now, the Monroe Doctrine also stated that we're not going to, if you still have colonies here, we're not going to get in your way. Britain, France, Spain, they still, at the time of the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, they still did have some colonies. We're not going to mess with the ones you still have, but the ones that have declared independence, you need to back off or else. Now, the Monroe Doctrine didn't really go on to say, like, we are going to fight you, but it was kind of implied. It was basically like, you better not, because we're the power now in the Western Hemisphere. The last part of that question says, how did President James Monroe respond to these newly formed republics? And that's exactly what happened, the Monroe Doctrine. So you should understand what the Monroe Doctrine did, and that's exactly what I just said, right? It was like that stop sign, that warning sign in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Caribbean Sea, that warning to European nations that, you know what, you got to back off because we are going to be the leader, kind of the representative voice of all of these newly formed republics here in the Americas. Okay. That was number 8. The next most popular, there's a tie. John Quincy Adams, 1821, July 4th speech. And, the differences. Okay. I'm going to get to John Quincy Adams, 1821, July 4th speech. I'm going to tell you this. It's so brief, and it's in chapter 6, section 3. So if I get to it, I get to it. That's literally one question. The difference between Democratic Republicans and Federalists, that's a bunch of questions. So let's go through that right now. So we're going to go through this together. You may have already filled out this table. If you haven't, then this is your time to start taking notes. If you have, this is just your time to start kind of verifying what you already have. So on the Democratic, I'm right here. You see, here's the study guide right here. Can I see myself? There it is. There's the study guide. And so I'm just going to go over these. And first of all, the leaders of the Democratic Republicans. The founder of the Democratic Republicans, Thomas Jefferson, right? And his best buddy, his best friend, the guy who lived like just down the way in Virginia. I visited both of their homes, by the way. They're amazing. It's Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So those are really the two major leaders that you need to know from the Democratic Republicans. On the Federalist side, the founder of the Federalist Party, Alexander Hamilton. Another major Federalist leader, I'm going to say, is John Adams. So that's your first one right there. In what parts of the country were they concentrated? the Democratic Republicans, they were mostly in the South and the West. Same place where you'd find the Warhawks, right? Out in rural areas, in farmland. That's mostly what Democratic Republicans are going to represent, mainly because they wanted to kind of be left alone. They wanted to have that sort of like that independence, that just kind of, let me make my whiskey and farm my crops and kind of do my thing. Those were the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists, you're going to find them mostly in the Northeast, right? In New England, in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey. You're going to find Federalists in industrial manufacturing areas, right? Along rivers and in harbors and ports where there's shipping and trade. That's what the Federalists were all about. They were all about, like I said, trade and shipping, trading with other nations, particularly Britain. The Federalists were fond of. And you're also going to find them in major cities as well. So New York City, Boston. Although most of Pennsylvania was Democratic Republican, Philadelphia, that kind of urban center closer to New Jersey, closer to New York City, Philadelphia is going to be predominantly Federalist. So that's where in the parts of the country. Oh, and of course, the Federalists you can find, like I said, predominantly in cities and urban areas, whereas the Democratic Republicans kind of in rural farmland areas. Their beliefs on domestic policy. So this is like what really I think this question should ask, what should the economy be based on, right? And for the Democratic Republicans, it should be based on farming, on agriculture. They wanted to have an agrarian economy. We talked about Thomas Jefferson. His vision for the nation was to have this empire of liberty, if you remember that term, where every American could be a yeoman farmer. If you recall, that's like to be like a small farmer, not like a small person, but to own a small piece of land, just enough land. We're not talking about a big plantation. We're talking about just enough land, a yeoman farmer, to support himself and his family, right? Maybe sell a little bit, make a little bit of money, grow some crops for yourself. That's a yeoman farmer. That was Thomas Jefferson's vision. And that was why Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Purchase, so that there would be enough land to create what he was talking about, this empire of liberty, right? This example of a country where everybody could have their own little piece of land to own for themselves. Domestic policy on the Federalist side, they believed in a manufacturing economy, right? Where we build things, where we create things. And, factories in the late 1700s and early 1800s, not like what we would think of today. This is still like, we're just getting started in the Industrial Revolution. Britain is going to beat us to it, which is why Britain had an advantage over us. Britain could make stuff less expensively than we could, which is why Federalists and then later the National Republicans, later the Whigs, are going to get on board with a protective tariff, right? And Federalists would have believed in a protective tariff as well to protect American industries, because at the time we weren't as competitive as Britain. So Britain could sell stuff cheaper, just like today. Who sells us stuff cheaper than we can make it? China. China has a competitive advantage when it comes to manufactured goods. So we charge a protective tariff on stuff that comes in from China to make American goods a little bit more competitive. Back then, 200 years ago, we charged a protective tariff to make our goods a little bit more competitive against British goods, because they had an advantage on us. They started industrializing before we did. Beliefs on foreign policy, just real quick. Democratic Republicans supported France. They were Francophiles. And Federalists they supported Britain, so they were Anglophiles, right? Beliefs on the role of government. Democratic Republicans believed that government should be small, limited central government, whereas the Federalists believed in a strong central government. Democratic Republicans wanted to lift up states' rights. They wanted more power to the states. The Federalists wanted weaker state governments in favor of a strong central government. And then finally, what happened to the party by 1828? By 1828, the Democratic Republicans had morphed, right? If you recall, kind of following this in the reading, the Democratic Republicans became the National Republicans. It was all like kumbaya during the James Monroe era, during the era of good feelings, right? Because everybody was kind of a Democratic Republican, National Republican, no real party strife. James Monroe didn't really have any challengers. So everybody was just, after the War of 1812, everybody was just feeling good, kind of everybody on the same side, feeling good about being an American. What happened to the Federalists by 1828? Their party was done. Pretty much John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, was really all that was left of the Federalist Party. Everybody else had vanished because of their involvement in the Hartford Convention. If you remember that Hartford Convention during the War of 1812 really kind of killed it for the Federalists. So by 1828, they've kind of been absorbed by the National Republicans. They don't really exist. Those people who were Federalists would eventually kind of form the Whig Party, start the Whig, W-H-I-G, Whig Party, and then those the former Whigs, because the Whig Party kind of dies out after a while, they're eventually going to become the Republican Party, but we haven't even gotten to that yet. The Democratic Republicans, what happened to them? Oh, I don't think I even finished saying that. By 1828, the Democratic Republicans had morphed into the National Republicans and then morphed officially into the party of Andrew Jackson, the Democratic Party. And still the party that is today, the Democratic Party of today, has its roots all the way back in the election of 1824 and the election of 1828 with Andrew Jackson. So that's what happened to the Democratic Republicans. They have since morphed into just being the Democratic Party that we still know today. Okay. We have a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff. We talked about number 8, number 9. Okay, so the difference between Democratic Republicans and Federalists, talked about that. Really briefly, I'm gonna talk about John Quincy Adams' 1821 July 4th speech. He's basically saying, and you can read, I don't have the quote in front of me that's in the textbook, but I'll have you read it. Basically, Adams says, John Quincy Adams, the son of President John Adams, President John Quincy Adams, in his 1821 4th of July speech says, we're a powerful nation, and we now have the ability to, I'm paraphrasing, we now have the ability to go and kind of spread our ideas out to the world. But we do this not to be like this big monster country, not to like push our ideas out to other, not to kind of, bully other countries into believing what we believe, but rather to be a positive example. That's what we should be as Americans, is a positive example for the rest of the world. So when I ask, what is America's special role in the world? It should be, it should be as a role model to other nations and not a bully. Have we always followed John Quincy Adams' advice? As you examine American history, not always, but for the most part, I do believe that we keep trying to come back to that ideal of really trying to be a good example, to be role models, to be a positive example for the rest of the world, like to show this is what a country should behave like most of the time. Not always in our history, but we always try to make, always try to be better. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch now. I want to switch to vocab because you're asking questions about vocab, and I want to be able to answer those questions. Okay. So on the vocab, the number 1 requested is status quo. So I'm going to, as my voice cracks a little bit, here's what status quo is. Status quo is Latin. It literally means, by the way, for those of you just joining us, hello, we're on the back page. We're on the vocab section. Status quo literally means, in Latin, go back to the way things were before. In the context of the War of 1812, it meant everything went back. We hit like I talked about earlier, we hit a reset button and we went back to the way things were before the war. In other words, no land changed hands, no money changed hands. We went back to the status quo. When we're talking, using that as a term in everyday language, if we talk about maintaining the status quo, it just means, let's not rock the boat. Let's not try to change anything. Let's just keep things the way they are. Let's maintain the status quo. In the movie National Treasure that we saw towards the end of the film, when like the bad guy is, threatening to hurt people, Gates's father, Ben Gates's father, he's like, you know what? Let's just maintain the status quo. Let's just be cool, and then we won't get hurt. So that status quo just means the way things have always been. That's the status quo. Okay. Next, corrupt bargain. Ooh, I love telling this story. So this is the second most popular, second most requested vocab term is corrupt bargain. Let me tell you what it is. In the election of 1824, there was and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 270towin.com. I'm sorry you can't see this. There's no way for me to share my screen, but I am, if you're a fan of 270towin.com like I am, I'm going to the historical elections timeline. I've shown you this in my class before, and I'm going back to the election of 1824 myself. And what I see is in the election of 1824, there were 4 candidates total. There was Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, William Crawford, and Henry Clay. I always forget William Crawford because everybody forgets William Crawford. Poor guy. Anyway, there was a 4-way race, and everybody in the election of 1824 was a Democratic Republican, also sometimes called the National Republicans during that time. There was just one party. And so nobody got a majority of electoral votes. I really want to show this to you because this is totally going to be, this is kind of a janky way to do this, but it will work because I really want to emphasize this to you. And this is how you get it done here. So these are, can I show you? Can you see this? I'll back it up. Hey, look at that. Okay. So you'll notice, whoa, let's back it up here. Come on now. Come on. Oh my goodness. Can we catch that? Can we kind of see it? Kind of, sort of. Anyway, you could see it for just a moment. And now it's just getting way too bright. Oh, back it up. Oh my goodness. Okay. Anyway, the electoral votes, nobody got a majority of electoral votes in the election of 1824. Andrew Jackson got the most. I'll try to show you this one more time and let's see if it works, and maybe it will or not. Andrew Jackson got the highest number with 99. We can just kind of barely make that out. My lighting is awful. Anyway, Andrew Jackson got the highest number of electoral votes with 99, but that wasn't a majority. John Quincy Adams got the next highest with 84. Crawford got 41, and Henry Clay got 37. Under the Constitution, if no one gets a majority of the electoral votes, who decides who becomes president? The House of Representatives. And so the election gets thrown into the House of Representatives, where they choose from the top three. The top three were Andrew Jackson, followed by John Quincy Adams, followed by, nobody knows him, William Crawford. Henry Clay, was number 4, so he couldn't even be considered. So it goes to the House of Representatives. Well, coincidentally, who happens to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives and therefore, the most influential and important person in the House of Representatives at that time? Henry Clay. And so Henry Clay is ultimately going to have the power to sway the votes, just like, throughout history, the Speaker of the House has had pretty significant power and influence over their party and over the House of Representatives in general. No different with Henry Clay. Henry Clay convinces the members of the House of Representatives, to vote not for the top vote getter, Andrew Jackson, because he hated Andrew Jackson. He convinced all of the majority of the members of the House of Representatives, to vote instead for John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams became president of the United States, even though he did not win a majority, or he didn't even win the most popular votes, and he didn't even win the most electoral votes. But under the Constitution, none of those things matter. If no one wins an electoral majority, it goes to the House. Henry Clay convinced his other members of the House to pick John Quincy Adams. Shortly thereafter, I need to also tell you this. The position of Secretary of State was hugely important during this time. It still is. It's still an important job, but it was especially important. And Secretary of State was basically like a stepping stone to become president. Thomas Jefferson was a Secretary of State. He became president. James Madison, Secretary of State, became president. James Monroe, Secretary of State, became president. John Quincy Adams was the Secretary of State, became president. So right after John Quincy Adams becomes president, who does he pick as his Secretary of State? None other than Henry Clay. So then people are like, whoa. Henry Clay, you convinced the members of the House to vote for John Quincy Adams. And then John Quincy Adams turned around and appointed you the next Secretary of State. That is shady. That is like a quid pro quo. Quid pro quo, which is Latin for, that term came up a lot during the impeachment hearings recently, the impeachment trial of President Trump. Quid pro quo means you do something for me and I'll do something for you. Well, people were accusing John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay of a quid pro quo. Hey, Henry Clay, if you convince your people to vote for me for president, then I'm going to go ahead and make you Secretary of State so that you can be the next president of the United States. There is no hard evidence that there was ever any quid pro quo between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, but it still looked shady. And that's why Andrew Jackson and his supporters were accusing them of what's called the corrupt bargain. So when we talk about the corrupt bargain of 1824, that's exactly what we're talking about. Andrew Jackson was riding that. He kept talking about that during the next 4 years. And Andrew Jackson ultimately will get an electoral majority in 1828 and win outright and not have to go to the House of Representatives. So that's the little story of the election of 1824 and what was called the corrupt bargain. Okay. Ooh, we're still plugging along. By the way, hey, Mr. Hahn, I see that you are commenting, and I appreciate that. And to everybody else who is commenting, thank you. To everybody else who's kind of helping out. I will point out because John Sarte, thank you. I noticed that you said something that's like, look at his Quizlet. If we don't get to all the vocab, here's the great thing is you can use the Quizlet. The Quizlet, I pushed that on Google Classroom, also put it on MrIppolito.com. So definitely check out the Quizlet for the vocab terms that we don't go over, because that's a good resource. I think I'm about to sneeze. Okay. And then I lost it. The next, oh, pardon me. Okay, moving on. The next most requested item is Old Ironsides. Old Ironsides, the vocab term in the lower left-hand corner, and I will tell you that Old Ironsides is the nickname for the USS Constitution. If you recall, during the War of 1812, the USS Constitution was in a battle, very famous battle with the HMS Guerriere. We had several presentations on this during we had one presentation per class period on the Constitution versus the Guerriere, basically one of the most famous naval battles in American history. And the British ship was kept firing cannonball after cannonball at the USS Constitution. And our ship, the USS Constitution, cannonballs just kept bouncing off one after the other. And they're like, man, it is as though the ship was made of Spanish oak, like really, really super thick Spanish oak. But to an observer where the cannonballs just keep bouncing off, it's like, oh, it is like this ship is made of, it has iron sides. It is like this cannonballs just keep bouncing off. It's incredible. So the USS Constitution won this naval battle during the War of 1812 against the HMS Guerriere, the British ship. And so it got the nickname Old Ironsides. You can still visit the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, in Boston Harbor still today. I have visited the ship. It is still an actively commissioned naval vessel. And so members of the United States Navy sailors, U.S. Navy sailors will actually give you a tour. You can walk, you can step onto the deck and go below deck on the USS Constitution. It is incredible. You need to do it next time you visit Boston. Okay. Old Ironsides, infrastructure, and precedent are my next two. I'll talk about infrastructure first. Infrastructure is whenever we talk about making internal improvements, if you recall, John C. Calhoun and Daniel Webster and Henry Clay during the 1820s, these guys were all about internal improvements. The American system was all about internal improvements. Let's build a stronger and better networked America so that we can get to other places faster, so that we can connect and so we can have better trade and better communication. That's what infrastructure is. So infrastructure is whenever you invest in things like roads, canals, bridges. Later on, not quite yet, but we're about 10 years away from railroads, and then later the telegraph, and then of course later on telephone lines. Today, when we talk about infrastructure, it includes sewage systems, water systems, utility lines, cell phone towers, and internet connection, high-speed broadband, and all that stuff. So all the stuff that kind of connects us together. All of that, highways, interstate highways, roads, bridges, all of that stuff. Whenever you hear a politician, a presidential candidate talking about, hey, I want to improve our nation's infrastructure, that's exactly what they're talking about. Infrastructure. Okay. Next is precedent. And precedent, that vocabulary term, I think we talked about it earlier. We talked about George Washington. It was all the firsts that he did. It's whenever you set an example for others to follow. So George Washington set a number of precedents. For example, the two-term precedent, right? Where he was like, you know what? It's been 2 terms. I'm out of here. I think somebody else should do this now. I can't do this forever. So the 2-term precedent, the example, George Washington set that. George Washington set the precedent of appointing a cabinet. Like the Constitution doesn't say anything about a cabinet, but George Washington, he had to start somewhere. And so he created these heads of these departments that would serve as his advisors. That was the cabinet. He appointed those advisors, and then those advisors were approved by the Senate. And so the creation of a cabinet was another precedent set by George Washington. George Washington set the "so help me God" precedent. Like nowhere in the Constitution does it say put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. Well, no, it doesn't say that. It just has the oath in the Constitution. It doesn't have the "so help me God" at the end. But every president since George Washington has said "so help me God" and put their left hand on the Bible because George Washington set the precedent. So a precedent is just an example, usually a positive example for others to follow. Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to pick a few more that have been voted on here. I'll pick sedition. Sedition is speaking out against the government, saying bad things, negative things against the government. The Alien and Sedition Acts during John Adams' administration, the Sedition Act portion of that was designed to limit speech, negative speech against Adams and Congress and the Federalist Party in general. Later, of course, it was deemed unconstitutional, but at the time, like that hadn't been tested yet. Like, can you speak out against the government? I don't know. The answer was no, you can't. And Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were very vocally outspoken against the Alien and Sedition Act. So anyway, that's sedition, is speaking out against your government. All the rest of these there. Oh, let me keep clicking here. No, all the rest of these. All right. So let me go ahead. We have 10 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and go to the chat. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through. Oh my goodness. I don't even have. Where's all my chat? I lost some of my chat. Okay. Those of you who are at the top, I can't even see the top of the chat anymore. So I do see Amon. Is our response to Barbary pirates an undeclared naval war with North African nations? No. Barbary pirates were the pirates from North Africa that were attacking us. And was it an undeclared naval war? Well, it was not. I will say it was not a declared war. It was a military action authorized by Thomas Jefferson to stop the Barbary pirates. So it wasn't necessarily going to war with a nation like a Britain or a France. So in that sense, I suppose you could say that it was undeclared. Okay. Are questions like that? What are the main points of the farewell address? Multiple choice. Katie, you're asking. So farewell address, Mr. Hahn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the farewell address, we might have one or two questions on the farewell address in multiple choice, but the majority of what you're going to focus on for the farewell address is actually going to be in the written portion. So you should really examine those pieces of the farewell address that we gave you and make sure you understand them. Go over your notes. You took notes on this. You took notes on the farewell address when we compared the two farewell addresses. So just make sure that you understand those quotes, particularly the ones like I gave you one big long excerpt. We talked about that. But I also gave you specific quote A, quote B, quote C, quote D in George Washington Goes Home. So I'm telling you right now, look at those quotes. Understand those quotes. Like there was a reason why I picked those quotes specifically. So just understand all those. About how many of the 7 presidents will we have to write about in the written portion? How can I explain? You're going to pick one. You're going to pick one president and you're going to write about them. I'm not going to give away the topic, but you're going to pick one of the presidents, but you don't know what you're going to write about yet. So you really should know all the presidents. Cynthia says, can you summarize number 2? Oh, I talked about number 2. So we're good there. Do we have to know exactly what happened in Marbury versus Madison? No, just what it did and why it was important. Abby, to answer your question. Is the multiple choice on Chromebook? Yes, it's on the Chromebook. Multiple choice is Chromebook, and then the written portion is on paper. Good question. John Sarte, I know the vocabulary is going to be multiple choice. Will there be matching questions? No matching. No matching, just like those vocab questions. It's going to be like this term. Like we'll give the definition of the term. It's kind of like Quizlet. I give you the definition. You tell me the term. Michelle Klopp says there's like 50 multiple choice questions. Yeah, there are going to be between 45 and 50. Mr. Hahn and I have already written 41 of them. So we just need 9 more. We're going to finish writing those tomorrow before second period. Yep. Can you help with the graph table below number 11? Yeah, I did. We talked all about political parties. Yes, we already went over that. So to answer your question, Katie Lee, yes, took over. We already took care of that. CJ, what papers are we turning in the next class? The only thing, CJ, that you need to turn in to me is this right here. This is the Early Republic Study Guide, and you only need to turn it in if you get below a B on the final on this unit exam. I think that everybody should turn it in, but if you get an A or a B on the test, I'm not going to hound you for it. I'm not going to like bug you. I'm just going to put, if you don't give it to me and you get an A or B on the exam, I'm just going to put X on there. But just turn it in because it has the greatest value. Oh, by the way, if you turn it in late, it's not going to have as much value. Like turn it in on time. Turn it in when it's due because it's due tomorrow because the test is tomorrow. It's going to have its greatest value tomorrow. So turn it in tomorrow. Alexa, we don't have to write about all 7 presidents. No, you're going to pick one. Are there specific dates that we have to know? No, I think I already answered that question for you, Abby. Not specific dates, but you should kind of know the order in which things happened. I think that's helpful. Barbary States, yes, you do need to know about the Barbary States because the Barbary States that was one of the things that happened during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. So, yes, and it's also question number 5. So, yes, you do need to know the Barbary States and the Barbary Pirates. Are there going to be any written choice questions? I'm not sure what written choice questions are. Yes, there are 2 written questions on the front. You're going to get your choice of 2 written questions. You're going to write on one on the back. You're going to have one question on George Washington's farewell address on the back of the written. The written will be 2 sides. You're going to answer 2 questions on the written. Caitlin asks, are all the vocabulary words in the test? I don't know. Mr. Hahn, are all of these? No, they're not yet. But a lot of them are. Like, I'm not going to waste your time. A lot of them are. I can't guarantee that all of them. Meteoric isn't on there yet, but I love that word meteoric. We talked about meteoric in the context of Tecumseh, right? Like his career was meteoric, meaning like just like a meteor, it burned really bright and it didn't last for very long. But man, it had an impact. Like, wow, meteoric. I like that word, meteoric. Okay. Braxton, have we gone over question number 4? Hello, Braxton. Yes, we did. So if you missed it, go back and watch it earlier. Yes, Rachel says just go backwards. Yes. John Sarte says lag. I apologize. It's going as fast as Spectrum internet will go. Rachel says wait till the end when he's done. It becomes a video to get it. Yes, Braxton, if you want to vote. Oh, yeah. Okay. Prophecy. Anne, are you asking about a prophecy? A prophecy is when you make a prediction about what is going to happen in the future. Professor Trelawney in the Harry Potter series made prophecies. The prophet, Tecumseh's little brother, Lalawithika, as an adult, was known to make prophecies about what will happen in the future. That's what gave him the nickname the prophet. Okay. Where were Braxton asks, where were the Shawnee tribes located? In the Ohio River Valley, Braxton. In what is today, thank you, Mr. Hahn. In what is today Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois. Okay. Good. Where should be up to? Braxton asks, where should we be up to in the first 7 presidents? You should be right up to John Quincy Adams because we haven't really learned much about the Andrew Jackson presidency yet. So just up through John Quincy Adams, and then you're in good shape. Who was Tecumseh's brother? Lalawithika, the prophet. And Abby says, yes, I thought we were only supposed to go up to John Quincy Adams. You're correct. How many points will the written portion be worth? Katie asks. I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't decided yet. Do we have to study the farewell address? Caitlin asks. Absolutely, yes. And we spent a good amount of time talking about the farewell address. Yes, there will be 1 or 2 multiple choice questions on the farewell address. And then also there is a written portion of the farewell address. So you should know the quotes that I pulled for you. The portions that I pulled for you, you should know. Okay. Still going back in time. Yes. Lalawithika. Thank you, Mr. Hahn. You've been jumping on. I appreciate it. Lalawithika, loudmouth. Remember? So if you remember the story, we watched the video. Tecumseh's little brother, Lalawithika, he shot his eye out. Remember that? And the name Lalawithika means loudmouth. Like he was a complainer. He was a loudmouth. So we sometimes see in sibling dynamics, like Tecumseh was who was born Tenskwatawa, by the way. Tecumseh was like the older brother, quiet, respected, kind of the very charismatic, just sort of had that presence, that vibe, right? People respected him. His little brother was a little bit more rambunctious, louder, kind of had to compete for attention because his brother was big, tall, respected, loved, just kind of one of the popular kids, but popular for a good reason. His little brother, Lalawithika, just kind of had to compete for attention. Lalawithika means loudmouth, and he was loud because he was looking for attention. Let's see. There's a question on retakes. So Yeah, a lot of people are asking, will there be a retake? My policy is retakes on everything except the final exam. There will be a retake opportunity for this exam. I will say again, there will be a retake opportunity. It will be an entirely written retake. So that written retake and it's good for up to 80%. But be prepared, because that written retake, it'll be a rigorous retake. It's not going to be as short as a quiz retake. So just be prepared. I would say it's going to be definitely to your advantage to try to do it right the first time, than just relying on a retake. But a retake will be available on this exam if you need it. Yep. Okay, so oh yes, a lot of people confused. Yes, this is not a final. Mr. Ippolito said you can do retakes on any quizzes or exams, just not the final. That is true. Just kind of put that to rest. Okay. Abby says, in class, I'm pretty sure Mr. Ippolito told us that John Marshall was another important Federalist leader. That's correct. He was another important Federalist leader. And actually, I would say that John Marshall was the longest lasting Federalist, right? Because when all the other Federalist presidents and Federalist members of Congress went away, when I think about it, we really only had one true Federalist president. That was John Adams. George Washington, you might see him listed as a Federalist, but George Washington, he really wanted to remain neutral. So he might have called himself a Federalist just to make Alexander Hamilton happy, but really George Washington was neutral. So really the only true Federalist president was John Adams. Long after John Adams was out of the presidency and all the Federalists were gone from Congress, John Marshall, Chief Justice John Marshall, remained. And so he was kind of the last vestige of the Federalist Party in the United States government. We be fighting over retakes. No need to fight. I've settled it. So we're good. Michelle says, I need help on number 9. And we'll go a little bit longer. I do see, speaking of 9, I do see that it's 9:01. Some of you need to go to sleep, myself included. But I will go ahead and answer the question number 9. Which members of Congress were outspoken in supporting the American system? Talked about it earlier. We got the 3 guys. We have Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun. Henry Clay from Kentucky, representing the West. John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, representing the South. And Daniel Webster from New Hampshire and Massachusetts, representing the Northeast, right? So all those 3 guys stuck up for the American system. And which areas of the U.S.? Oh, I already talked about that. Describe in detail the features of the American system and how they would improve America. So just real quick, there are more details, and these details are available in either Chapter 6, Section 1 or Chapter 6, Section 2. But the American system, it really all boils down to, most of it boils down to those internal improvements. We talked about infrastructure. We talked about that vocab term, infrastructure. It was all about making improvements to American infrastructure so that trade could go faster. Canals connected the Great Lakes to the Erie Canal, for example, would connect Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes, with the Hudson River, which would then go out to the Atlantic Ocean. So when you start to build those canals, you're connecting the Great Lakes to river systems that go out to the Atlantic, so you can have better trade. You're connecting one Great Lake to another, those canals. So canals helped with trade and communication. Roads, when you're building roads and smoothing out, creating pathways for trade, and of course later the railroads, those were infrastructure improvements. So that was part of the American system. The other part of the American system was a protective tariff. Protective tariff, as we've talked about before, if the competitor, if Britain can sell stuff at this much and American goods cost this much because we're still behind in the Industrial Revolution, Britain has a head start on us. If we charge a protective tariff, then the prices become more competitive. The British goods might be still cheaper, just like Chinese goods are still cheaper than American-made goods in most cases today. But because they're more competitive because of the tariffs, people might be more inclined to buy American if they know that the prices are competitive. So 2 main things, infrastructure improvements and protective tariff, were the 2 biggest parts of the American system. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. Yeoman Farmer. Wait, is he going to go over it? Oh, okay. I went over number 9. So I think that was, can someone help? Michelle, I helped you. Hello. Yes. Mr. Hahn answered Yeoman Farmer. I didn't skip it, Michelle. I just talked about it. Okay. Well, this is an exam. Yes. Jose's jumping in. Thanks, Jose, to help answer those. Okay. John Sarte said Russia. I'm not sure what that means. Thank you, Mr. Hahn, for Francophiles and Anglophiles. Whig Party. Mr. Hahn, I love how he's just jumping in. I'm not quite sure what these mean. I'm assuming you're answering questions, though. Ben Moy. Hello, Ben. Oh, John Quincy Adams. I talked about number 10. And I talked about the 4th of July address. So, Ben, I've answered your question. Okay, John, I get it that there's a little bit of lagging. Nothing I can do about it. I got a high-speed connection here. Maybe next time I'll go to my classroom. Maybe that would be better to prevent some of the lagging. Or maybe just get a little closer, go upstairs next time. I'll remember that because I'm downstairs right now. I'm kind of far away from my router. So that could be it. John, I appreciate your feedback. Thank you. And Mr. Hahn, for the win. Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Okay. Well, we need to know the backside of the first 7 presidents. Chloe, you need to know up through John Quincy Adams. Okay. Alexa, you say, okay, well, I am, to be honest, confused. Alexa, if you can clear up what you might be confused about, I would be happy to help you. John Sarte, starting to go a little off topic, so let's keep it on topic because High School Musical. Stick to the status quo. Is that from High School Musical, John Sarte? I'm assuming that is. Okay. Number 11. Oh, good. Okay, so Abby asked number 11. Jose and John were helping out. I'm just going to go ahead and say, for the record, because I can answer number 11 really quickly. How did the United States become more democratic in the age of Jacksonian democracy? The number one way is that more people gained access to the vote because in several states in the United States during that time, you had to own property in order to vote. To own property basically meant you had a certain amount of wealth, right? So really only the wealthy, the upper middle class, people who own property could vote at the beginning of our country. During the time of Jacksonian democracy, the 1820s and 1830s, that's going to start to shift. And pretty much by the end of the 1830s, pretty much all the states have dropped their property qualifications. So you don't need to own property. So basically, you don't need to be wealthy in order to vote. So anybody, regardless of their wealth, could vote as long as you are white, male, and over the age of 21. So the second part of the question asks, how was it still not as democratic as our nation is today? Well, it still wasn't, because if you're a woman, you still couldn't vote. If you were any kind of person of color, you still could not vote. Certainly slaves, African Americans could not vote. Native Americans could not vote, and women could not vote. And you couldn't vote if you were between the ages of 18 and 20. You still couldn't vote either. So those are just some of the increased voting rights that we have added since then. So we dropped the property qualification, which was a good thing, but it took later advancements in civil liberties and civil rights, for that matter, to kind of drop some of those other limitations on voting rights. So we have far more voting rights today. More people can vote today. More people are eligible to vote today than earlier in our nation's history. Okay, I think I'm almost caught up with the comments. Angela asked, how many points will this test be worth? We talked earlier, and Anne is kind of helping out here. Point-wise, I think we're going to have about 50 questions on multiple choice. I'm not sure on the written yet. Mr. Hahn and I will figure that out, and we'll let you know. Okay. Will there be retakes? Talked about that. And John Sarte says, bless you too, John Sarte. Okay, and all of the rest of you. This isn't on the study guide, Emily Swift says, but on the first 7 presidents, do we have to fill out Andrew Jackson's spot? No, you do not. You only need to fill up through John Quincy Adams. Okay. Alexa says, I'm scared for the test. Alexa, if you've been studying, listening, paying attention, then you got this. You got this. Abigail, you say, also, do we have to know all the Barbary states? You don't need to have all the Barbary states memorized. You should know that they're on the coast of North Africa and know what they were doing to us. They were attacking. They were pirates from these Barbary states that were attacking American ships in the Mediterranean. We were just trying to trade. We're just trying to do our thing and make some money. They were attacking, seizing, just like they were seizing other ships from Europe. And what the other countries of Europe would do was they would just pay tribute. Hey, look, there's another vocab term, tribute. So these other European nations, they're like, oh, we want our people back. We want our ships back. So they would pay the money. They would pay the tribute, the ransom, basically, to these pirates. And Thomas Jefferson and America, we said, no, we're not going to pay any stinking tribute to some stinking pirates. And so Thomas Jefferson sent the United States Navy and the Marines over to North Africa. We invaded Tripoli, and we captured the capital of the Barbary States, and we stood up for ourselves, and we said, we're not going to pay some stinking tribute. We're going to use our money to invest in our military instead. We kicked some butt. The Marine Corps hymn, we listened. I played that for a couple of classes. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. The halls of Montezuma revert to the Mexican-American War, which we haven't learned about yet, but we will. And the shores of Tripoli, that's like the Marine Corps. The Marines are celebrating in the second line of their official song. That's one of the first times we kicked butt. Was we represented America, the shores of Tripoli, when we went and defeated the Barbary States and stopped the acts of piracy against American ships. Okay, one of the few times I will sing on in a YouTube YouTube live. Okay, John Sarte, shout out to Mr. Han, Mr. Ippolito, and everyone in this live chat. You guys are the best. Yes, I would agree with you, John Sarte, that you guys are the best. We're gonna wrap it up real quick. It's 9:10, but I still have 29 people in this chat, and 9 likes so far. So hey, we're rocking it. Katie, I'm gonna help you out real quick. Sedition, talked about that already. That's speaking out against your country. Was made illegal during the Alien and Sedition Acts under John Adams' presidency. But of course, we know that's a violation of your free speech rights. So it went away under Thomas Jefferson's administration shortly after. Confederation. Confederation is when a group of nations or a group of people, or in this case, a group of tribes, because we're talking about the Tecumseh Confederacy or the Tecumseh Confederation, also sometimes called the Shawnee Confederation. It's when the tribes of the Ohio River Valley got together to stand up against the Americans. That was the Confederation that we're talking about. Our first go round, when we first tried to come together as a nation, we were a confederation. The United States was a confederation, not like a true cohesive country. We were under the Articles of Confederation, if you recall. And then there's going to be another confederation that's going to come together right at the time of the Civil War. The southern states that secede from the Union, they are going to form a confederation, kind of a loose collection of states, not a strong cohesive country, because the states still wanted to have that autonomy, kind of wanted to govern themselves. So we'll talk about that again when we study the American Civil War. Katie, tribute, already talked about that. We talked about the money that we refuse to pay to the Barbary pirates. That's tribute. Okay. Alexa says, confused about the chat. It's so fast, I can't keep up. Well, Alexa, the good news is that you can watch this over again later tonight, or tomorrow morning before school, tomorrow at brunch, tomorrow at lunch, because second period, we have our test after lunch, second period. And thank you for the shout out, John Sarte, as well. And so, okay, at this point, I think we're now down to the end of the chat. It is 9:12 p.m. And so I'm going to go ahead and call it. Here's what I'm going to say. Mr. Han and I will be in our classroom, room B5, at brunch and lunch tomorrow. So if you're in second period, periods 4, period 5, period 6, whatever class period you're in, if you have any last minute questions, clarifications, we cannot help you once the test begins, once the period begins. We can't help you. But if you come in to come see us before school brunch or lunch, we can absolutely help you if there's anything that we missed. Mr. Han says it's past my bedtime. Mr. Han, it is almost past my bedtime as well. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody. At this point, we're going to sign off. I want to give a special thank you to Mr. Han. Thank you to everybody who hung in there. Everybody who liked the video, thank you. And you guys are awesome. This was a great chat. Gosh, probably one of the best that we've had. Such good participation. I'll get some more detailed feedback from you. Especially want to know if you thought that doing the survey was a good thing. I think it helped to kind of streamline the chat a little bit, but I'll get your thoughts on that tomorrow and Thursday when we have the exam. So we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you so much. Thank you for participating in the February 2020 Early Republic Unit Exam YouTube live review. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in class. See you in room B5 very soon. Have a good evening. Get some rest, and I'll see you at Rio Norte very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.